Good evening, good morning, good day, whenever you might be watching this. For me, it's evening, as you can see, and snuggled in, getting ready for a long winter's nap. But I wanted to ramble on a bit more about Russia. I want to continue to pour out the contents of the can that I opened a few videos ago, and it concerns in a rather open-ended way, because again, this is not me systematically talking about anything. Although these ideas that I'm entertaining are interesting enough that I might eventually write something about them, and when I write something, it is more systematic and it is more that's where I think my true talent lies, in case you were wondering, in case you thought I thought of myself as a great speaker. I do not labor under that misapprehension. But just continuing what I was talking about in the last couple of videos on the subject of Russia. It's really strange that Russia ever became this world shaping phenomenon. That it became this nation that was so important, that got to be so important to so many people, and it continues to be so. However people's perspective I should say, on Russia. It continues to be, to use that phrase that's been used way too often. It lives rent free in many a mind these days. That there's many a fanatic renting his clothes and screaming about Russia these days. And there was no reason to think that it would develop, that things would develop this way. As far as Russia becoming the standard bearer of communism, which it was for most of the 20th century, to the great detriment of most of its citizens, of course, and to the misfortune of much of the world. It was not supposed to happen that way. The theorists of dialectical materialism, Karl Marx and his cronies, they thought that the communist revolution would take place in industrialized countries, that it had to take place. It could only take place in countries that were industrialized. Because nations, to Marx, had to first make the step to bourgeois capitalism before they could make the step to socialism and then to communism. And in Western Europe especially, and in North America, you had an industrialized world, but not in Russia in the 19th century, or even not into the 20th century. It remained, quote unquote, behind, in the sense of being a serf state, agricultural, ruled by a czar, deeply reactionary. And I don't say reactionary in a bad sense. I just in a descriptive sense, that a theocracy, powerful church and state connected, all those things. So the idea that it would happen in Russia first was something that never was supposed to happen, and that's part of what made the Blessed Virgin Mary's declarations at Fatima so prescient. She was the first to talk about, Russia. We've got to pray that Russia be consecrated to my Sacred Heart, she said, or else she will spread her errors across the world. What were those errors? In early or mid 1917, when these visitations were happening, no, no one knew what these errors could be. But, because nobody foresaw Russia going Bolshevik communist. But in October of 1917, after the Marian apparitions had ceased at Fatima, after the miracle of the sun, put a punctuation mark on those visions those visitations that went on month after month to those three guileless peasant children in the small village of Fatima, Portugal, which seems to be far away from the center of political importance. These visitations didn't happen. They didn't appear to any bishops. They didn't appear to the Pope in Rome. They didn't appear to any kings or any presidents or prime ministers. It was these three little kids. Who were illiterate, in this village that was far, far away. It seemed far, far away from anything, far, far away from the action, so to speak. But there you had it, and the Blessed Virgin Mary called it. She said, unless the Church prays, the hierarchy of the Church prays, because the hierarchy of the Church is still, the hierarchy of the Church, but so they still have the power invested in them as in the lines of succession, that is the apostolic succession. If all they had to do was pray formally together as a group, pray that Russia be consecrated to the Sacred Heart of Mary, but they didn't do that. And because they didn't do that, number one, Russia went communist and began to spread her errors across the world. And then number two, there was another terrible world war, which broke out a few years later, which was presaged by a sign in the sky, as I've talked about before. But anyway, what I just wanted to stay with, what I want to dwell on, what I find so interesting, and what I really just can't let go about all of this, this whole, these various threads, all of history and theology and so forth, all of which relate to Russia, is again just how Russia became this extremely important nation, this all-important nation. All eyes were on Russia, and yet this was a country that was just it was geographically impressive in that it was huge. It was a large landmass. But, of course, much of that large landmass was, bitterly cold, barely inhabitable, the Siberia region. But in the 20th century, Russia became this cause célèbre, and it became a country that was near and dear to the hearts of leftists, in the early part of the 20th century, who were, leftists in the West, who saw in Russia this great hope for the redemption of the world, the secular redemption of the world, because they were communists. They didn't believe in anything transcendent, but they were willing to sacrifice their lives, their reputations. They turned against their own countries. They turned against their own people. You had all of these again, people who important, people in literature and in the arts and other places as well, just about everywhere, who were so fanatically with Russia that they were willing to infiltrate their own nation, their own government. The Red Scare was not a reaction to nothing. It was a reaction to a movement that was genuinely afoot. It was read Whittaker Chambers' Witness. It was very, very credible. So anyway, for a while, for decades, even into the 70s and 80s, when I came onto the world stage myself, Russia was this very feared entity, and with some good reason. It was a totalitarian state. Communism was no picnic to live under. Stalin was a monster, and the other Russian premiers were not wonderful guys either. But anyway, it was the system that put Russia front and center in the minds of so many people in the West, both those who were fanatically behind it, had this kind of religious fervor, their fervor for achieving this, helping the world to reach this eschatological state of utopia, this heaven on earth that was supposed to happen after communists took over and the state withered away, and the workers' paradise was instituted. It was an absurd dream, but it was one that was sincerely believed in by many. And then, of course, 1989, Soviet Union fell. Communism ceased to be the predominant ideology, and Russia and much of the East was thrown into chaos for a time. But presently it came back. After a few very lean years, very difficult years of just being a puppet state, just being ruled by, just being this abject, the state of abject humiliation, where it was ruled and controlled by outside interests who didn't really care about the Russian people. Eventually, Russia found its feet again and became a power again, became a force to be reckoned with again in the world. And this time, as many have noted, when Russia was resurrected, when it rose from the ashes of its its death under communism, it came back as this this society that was building itself up, in some ways, a return to the forces that predominated in the 19th century, although there was no czar anymore. The royal family was viciously massacred by the Bolsheviks in 1917 or sometime around then, including the children. It was just this awful thing. So the royal lineage was gone, but you still had vestiges of the old mentality that maybe in some ways never left. In some ways they survived, through the communist years. And they're back. They're back on the world stage, and they're back to being feared and reviled by so many in the West who just seem to not be able to stop thinking about Russia, thinking that Russian machinations are behind everything, that Russian machinations, rigged the U.S. election in 2016, that Russian machinations are behind the the great chaos and division and the growing polarization of the West, and particularly of the United States. Well, no, they're not. That polarization exists all by itself. It came about through a series of, events. But what we have now in the West is not communism per se, not communism of the Soviet variety at all. And that distinction really should be drawn. When people say it's the communists, when people talk about the leftists in the media and academia and so forth, when they're called communists, really that's not accurate. It has been called cultural Marxism, and I think there's something useful to that term. Marxism is in some ways more poisonous than economic Marxism. Under communism in Russia, the family continued. The traditional lots of traditions endured. Masculinity was not attacked and reviled. Femininity was not attacked and reviled. There was not this effort to make everybody into hideous, unnatural golems. To wrench them out of their biology. That just wasn't really so much that wasn't the focus of Soviet communism at all. And the whole notion of multiculturalism, of which really means, hating on the white man. There was no effort in the Soviet bloc to force mass immigration. The Soviets did make allies with third world countries, and with forces like the PLO in the Middle East, or the ANC in South Africa, and others. But there was no notion of, we've got to bring these people in and replace our own selves because we are evil as we are and our culture is bad as it is. It needs to be replaced, and our traditions need to be totally totally drained of vigor and hung out to dry, and we've got to all become just genderless Gumbies, as it were. Nothing like that was ever a part of the Soviet system. But right now in Russia, Russia's seeing what's happening in the West, and it's not just Putin. It's spoken of as if, oh well, this is, Putin is seizing upon these things and he's making these speeches, for cynical ends, cynical reasons. But it's not just Putin. This is a widespread phenomenon in modern day Russia. This idea that Russia needs to resist the destiny of the West, that Russia has its own destiny, that it's not going to go the way of the decadent West. So I'm going to end this video now, but thanks for watching.